Welcome to the Church of Mabus radio show. It's Friday night. You're listening to 107.7 FM New Orleans, United Public Radio. It's 7:10 p.m. Central. We got Wham here with us tonight. How's it going, Wham?
Hi. Oh, it's actually today it's been an okay day.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, it has. It's been an okay day.
Nice. It's been cold in Florida, probably the last of the cold. I don't even know if I call it cold, but it's been chilly. It's about 40, so it's still cold, but our winter pretty much was non-existent, is what it felt like. Like there was no winter. We had a little bit, but not compared to last year, that's for sure. So I'm wondering if winter's just going to totally go away at this point. Like next year, there's just not going to be a winter at all. Who knows, but hopefully not, because that would be really terrible. Florida's already terrible enough when it's hot. It's like the Amazon. And I don't like it, but I'm here, so I got a deal. Nosferatu in Panama City. Well, let me plug a couple of things here. Tartu's saying audio dropped. I don't know if that's Tartu in chat or a global thing. Is it gone now? All right, let me get to my plug-in. First off, Asian tea is kratom. Asian tea is kratom, and that Asian tea is used by people all over for everything from pain relief to anxiety to sleep or get energy. It's 100% organic. This product has not been evaluated by the FDA and not intended to treat, cure, or diagnose any illness or disease. The website is AsianTeaIsKratom.com. Life is better on Taunton Bay. Let me see. Next, 30th annual Ozark Mountain UFO Conference. OzarkUFOConference.com. That's April 14th through the 16th. And you can go to OzarkUFOConference.com. I always love watching their DVDs because they record everybody, so that's always fun to watch them from home. Let me see, I got a few books to plug. Two titles are from Thomas Dunn Books, St. Martin's Press. One's Dogs of War, a Joe Ledger novel by Jonathan Mayberry. Nice, thrilling addition to the New York Times best-selling Joe Ledger series that pits Joe and his Echo team against an army of robotic dogs. Wow.
Cool. That sounds cool.
Jonathan Mayberry's awesome, so good dude. Only the Dead Know Brooklyn, Chris Vola. A vampire is confined to Brooklyn, gives up his immortality to save the human love of his life, and unknowingly wades into a much larger supernatural conspiracy. That's Only the Dead Know Brooklyn, and both of those are from Thomas Dunn Books, St. Martin's Press. Got two more here, and then we'll be done. Cold Counsel by Chris Sharp. This is by Tor Books. Fantasy. This is pretty cool. I haven't read it yet, but I'm going to. But it's told from like the perspective of the orc. It's kind of cool. Blood of the Bloodclaw. Blood of the Bloodclaw clan, bringer of troubles, was born at the heart of the worst storm the mountain had ever seen. That's just from the back, but it's told from the orc perspective, which is awesome. That's by Chris Sharp, Cold Counsel. Next, Pirate Utopia by Bruce Sterling. Introduction by Warren Ellis. This is from Tachyon. What is their website? TachyonPublications.com. It says, let me see, it's a satire about serious issues. Michael Moorcock blurb on it. That's pretty cool. And let me see, I just got it, so I haven't read it yet. A wild satire about serious issues. Sterling's Wonder Romp is perfectly matched by Coulthard's superb designs. The best of their brilliant generation, Sterling and his collaborator have produced a book to treasure. Bravo. So, Wham, what's up with the Venus retrograde? What in a little summary there, what is that going to do to us? What can it do to us?
Well, Venus is one of those planets. I mean, I'm just telling you what my astrology friend has said. I'm not a big astrologer myself, but usually what a Venus in retrograde is about see, Venus has two sides. We tend to think of Venus as being about love and romance and just in relationships and maybe sensuality. But Venus, as traditionally was a planet of love, but also of war. And in fact, the Mayan Indians saw Venus as actually being in some ways more dangerous than Mars for war, because Venus is about it's about the projection of people's ego fantasies and expectations onto things. That's the shadow side of it. And so, when someone casts a glamour in order to manipulate and control, and so the aspects that are surrounding this retrograde, my friend who's an astrologer, he considers to be particularly dangerous, because after a month in April, not only Venus will be retrograde, but then we're going to have a Mercury retrograde, and that combination, according to him, is really a textbook kind of case for the possibility of some kind of armed conflict or large terrorist action. And accompanied with lots of propaganda. And, Venus can make people really la-la land-like, you know what I mean? They can make them sort of not really paying attention to what's going on in reality.
Seems like that.
So, and it has to do not just simply with Venus being in retrograde, but the sign that it's in, and also the aspects that it's connected with. And this is just going by, he's been doing daily kinds of, audio blogs that get uploaded to my Facebook page. So that's just what he's saying. He thinks it's going to be a pretty dangerous time. So it may not have anything to do with your relationship specifically, or individuals might, personally have an okay time. That doesn't necessarily have anything to do with it. He's looking at it more, what its larger effects might be. So.
Gotcha. Well, I noticed on the Dark Astrology, or one of those sites, they had a picture of John Malkovich from Dangerous Liaisons, that movie with John Malkovich.
Uh-huh.
They had a picture on the article of John Malkovich from that movie, Dangerous Liaisons, where
right.
Wear a European style with a wig and all that stuff. But let's get to Jeffrey. I'm looking at Roots of Consciousness right now, the updated copy, and I had a copy of the other one, but when I moved from some chick's house really fast in Georgia, I think I left it there, so I had to buy a new copy. But in the front of it, someone signed it. So of course, I got it used, and it's in good condition, and it's got a signature though. It says, "To James, may this help you on your path. Love, Dad. 12/24/98." That's just a reflection of how epic this book is. It's a dad giving it to his son to help him on his path. I just saw that for some reason. I didn't see it when I first was looking through it, but good to have you here, Jeffrey.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
And I've been reading your book since my early 20s, and Roots of Consciousness, I had the older copy, and I always remember the pictures. I'm going to have to get a copy of the older copy, too, because I always enjoyed the art in it. I like the new one, too, but it doesn't have all the art of the older one, right? It does on some level, but not the color.
That's right. Not the color pictures and not the black and white drawings in the beginning and in the end.
Yeah, I like this one, but I want to get a copy of the older one, too. Then, of course, I got PK Man here. It's just good to have you here, and I've been having a great, awesome lineup, and you're definitely topping it off here. next week we got Jose Stevens on shamanism, and Joe R. Lansdale coming up. Looking forward to that. But I've been trying to just have like I'm on the 7th year, so I was kind of feeling kind of burned out. And one way to deal with that is just get awesome people on nonstop.
There you go. Well, let me ask you a question, if I may, since I'm your guest. What is Mabus? What is the Church of Mabus?
Oh, Lord.
Who is so Mabus? Controversial. It's so controversial. You have no idea how many times he's been asked that. But that's
well, you don't have to answer, but I thought it might help me to kind of...
I don't have a problem, man. Well, okay. I got a similar discussion with Peter Levindo when he was on about his newest book, The Lovecraft Code. To make just basically, it's from Nostradamus, and I'm sure you've heard of the word Mabus from Nostradamus, right?
Not really, no.
Wow. Got a version.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. But no, it's a word that Nostradamus uses in his quatrains and prophecies that no one really knows what the hell it means, but a lot of people think they know what it means. It's a mystery. A lot of people think it means something bad, like Antichrist or something like that, but he never says that. And just to make you understand, when I was in my early 20s, after my dad died, before that, I never did drugs ever because I thought my dad would shoot me if I did them, and he probably would if I did them, but he caught me. But after he died, I went crazy. I was like, Scarface. And I started getting into the occult, reading a lot of stuff, reading everything I can get my hands on. And I was in the heavy metal. I'm still in the metal, but not as bad as I used to be. So now I like soundtracks. Like before the show, I was listening to Game of Thrones orchestration. But to make a long story short, basically Nostradamus' quatrain speaks of Mabus, or Mabus, as some say. And I was like, I'm going to make a metal band and call it Mabus. And I just never got around to that. The name is a mystery. Nobody knows what it means. You'll see on the History Channel Doom and Gloom, and they'll say it means something creepy, like some creepy leader that, Sauron from Lord of the Rings or something. But honestly, nobody really knows what it means, but probably Nostradamus. I'm sure John Hogue or someone like that probably will tell you something completely, that he believes what it means, but nobody really knows. Nostradamus never says it means so-and-so or whatever.
So it's a pointer to the mysteries of life.
Exactly. One thing that I think for me personally, what I think it might have been was an acronym for a signpost of the times we're living in right now. Because in the quatrain it says Mabus will soon die and a comet will run and there'll be a horrible undoing of people, and it's basically a precursor for some leader that comes that's supposed to shake things up. But interestingly enough, if you put Osama and Bush together, you'll get the name Mabus. If you put Obama and Bush together, you'll get the name Mabus. Now, I've been trying like hell to tie it into Trump, but his name's not letting me do it, really.
Okay.
But some people think it means a doomsday type figure or something like that. But basically, I say the show's paranormal meets heavy metal, so it was just something back in my younger days that, I got famous, and I was like, I can't get rid of it. I probably should have never played with this name to begin with, but here I am. It's too late.
Okay.
But I'm glad you asked. I don't have a problem answering. It's just, some people won't do the show because of the name. Whitley Strieber, he said, I don't have anything to do with that name.
Oh, well, I have no problem, but it's nice to know about the orientation that you and your audience have.
Well, it's good that you're asking. And we've had so many people on, Jim Mars to you name it, and they just don't, they don't give a flip about the name. They're just here to rock, here to have a good time and have a good learning experience. But Well, I guess tell us a little bit about yourself for our audience, like a little bio if you could, and then I'd like to get into PK Man at first.
All right, that's fine. I'll tell you, I'm 70 years old. I turned 70 last December. I'm talking to you from my office in Las Vegas, where I have a TV studio, and I interview people here. I've been doing television interviews since 1986. Between 1986 and 2002, I was on public television all across North America with the Thinking Aloud show, and 2 years ago, in 2015, I launched the new Thinking Aloud channel on YouTube, and I've done about 200 interviews just in the last 2 years, half-hour video interviews, mostly focusing on parapsychology, which is my field. I'm a unique person in all the world because I happen to be the only person ever in the history of the world to earn a doctoral diploma that says parapsychology from an accredited university anywhere. And I've written a few books on the subject, and you mentioned one of them, The PK Man, which is about a decade-long study I did with an individual named Ted Owens who had extraordinary powers of psychokinesis. PK is the abbreviation parapsychologists use for psychokinesis, or mind over matter. But I'm pretty much a generalist in the field of the paranormal. I can converse with you about any aspect of it. You mentioned my first book, The Roots of Consciousness, originally published in 1975 when I was a young man, and that book is kind of an encyclopedic overview of the whole field of consciousness exploration and psychic phenomena.
Well, why PK Man interests me so much is myself personally, when I was 17, I had testicular cancer and went through chemo, and it woke me up. I call it a shamanic death of sorts. And I was healed, and I've been healed ever since. But it's when I found the universe is when I was going through, the suffering of chemo. And then about a year or so later, my dad died, and I started to have a lot of UFO experiences with multiple witnesses. And I've also seen a wide variety of different sorts of beings, some of the main ones are luminous beings, what I call them, were like light. But that's why Ted Owens interests me so much. I've had, some experiences like weather kind of stuff that's happened that kind of like I've wondered if I caused it. There's some weird parallels with it. I don't think I'm as extreme as Ted Owens, I'm not threatening to down aircraft or anything. But I've had some, like I can recall one incident that I always remember. My dad, he's passed now, but we were working on a car when I was a kid in a field, and it was really, really hot. And I was like, I wish it'd rain. And I tell you, the next thing you know, it was a blue sky, and clouds rolled in from out of nowhere, and it rained. And my dad got so mad, he hit me. He was abusive physically and mentally. And he something happened to where the car was doing something, but he actually hit me for making it rain. And
he knew you did that.
And he punched me for it.
But he knew that you not only said you wished it rained, but he believed that you actually caused it.
Exactly. And, he passed away, and that was a big effect on my life. And all my life I've seen UFOs with multiple witnesses. My mom, my brother, friends have been right next to me and said, Jeffrey, you're attracting these here. They've kind of calmed down lately, but in my early 20s to 30s, I kind of call that my golden oldie stage because that's when a lot of weird stuff happens. Some of it I'm still getting over. But now, the ones that seem the most current are seeing these light beings. Like I've seen them at least 4 or 5 times, or maybe more than that. After my dad died, I saw one standing on the clouds, and it was doing his finger at us like naughty, because my friend was driving, and we had been partying in my early 20s. It was a dirt road just going to my house. He still shouldn't have been doing it, but it was almost like it was saying no, 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 and he saw it too. And then several years ago from this house, I've been feeling kind of down and depressed, and sometimes I'll listen to an audio Holy Bible. I was raised in Christianity, and right now I'm studying Norse shamanism, so I kind of go all over the place. But I put that on, and something in my head goes, go outside, and I was like, okay, I'll do it. And I went outside and turned around and saw two beams of light come out of my roof and fly into the heavens. And sometimes when I'll wake up at night from sleep, I'll go out and let the dogs out and look up in the sky, and I swear I see them in the heavens is what it seems like. There's a quantum rim around the earth, and some of them, you see stars, of course, but it also seems like there's clusters of them. And we've had a shaman on, Don Oscar from Sounds True, and he said that down in Peru they gather in crowds and watch the shining ones in the sky, and that he felt that I was right about what they were, which was us without our bodies. But he also went into a spiel about us from the future, and it got pretty weird with that. But that's one reason why Ted Owens interests me so much. There's some weird little, parallels, or perhaps as a tale of caution for me that can help me on some level, or has helped me on some level. I'm just kind of curious, how did you originally come across Ted Owens, and how did that journey begin with PK Man?
Well, it's very interesting because I have a visitor with me now. I've been interviewing here, Russell Targ, who is a famous parapsychologist.
I know who Russell Targ is.
Yeah,
he doesn't know me, but but I know who he is.
He's 82 years old, and he made a special trip to Las Vegas where I am so I could interview him in person. Lovely. And he happens to be instrumental in introducing me to Ted Owens.
Awesome.
Because in 1976, I visited Russell when he's the co-founder of the remote viewing program at SRI International, a major military industrial think tank that did work for the CIA for 20 years, psychic spying work, basically, and but they also published their work on remote viewing publicly, and Russell was a friend of mine, and he invited me to come visit him at SRI and see for myself what all this remote viewing was about, and to experience it. And I did. I had a remote viewing experience in their laboratory, and it was quite successful. And then they showed me this big file they had on the shelf, and he told me about this strange man who had been bothering them named Ted Owens. And at the time they had achieved a lot of notoriety because they'd also done research with Uri Geller, the famous Israeli psychic, and but because they were getting funded at the time by the CIA, they didn't like all the publicity. And it was bad enough they had Uri Geller, who was a very flamboyant public person, but Ted Owens was now saying to them, why are you bothering with Uri Geller? I'm the world's greatest psychic. You should be researching me. And he kept sending them all these letters about, what he could do and his accomplishments and his demonstrations. And finally he said to them, look, I'm going to prove to you that I am, in fact, the world's greatest psychic. He said, I know that you're having a drought in California, which back in 76 was pretty bad. He said, I'm going to end that drought, and I'm going to make it rain and snow and sleet and hail. There's going to be the weirdest weather you have ever seen, and it's going to be accompanied by power blackouts and UFO sightings. Those are my trademarks. And it's going to happen all within a few days, and your local newspaper is going to run a story saying that the drought is over. And like within 3 days, all of that happened. And so Russell wrote to Ted Owens and said, that was a very good prediction, thank you. And Ted Owens wrote back to them and said, hell no, that was no prediction. I caused it. And at that point, Russell handed me the file, and he said, you're a bright young graduate student. Why don't you take this off of our hands? We don't want to have anything more to do with it. So I took the file, and I figured this might well be worth following up on. And subsequently, I met Ted Owens in London that year, the summer of 1976. He was, people had heard about this little story of the snowstorm in California, which was completely unexpected. If you ever lived in the San Francisco Bay Area, you know it almost never snows. So people in England were experiencing a drought, and they were having a big parapsychology conference in London, and they invited Ted Owens to come to speak at the conference and to help end the drought there. It was a very serious drought. When I arrived, I had friends I was staying with, and they told me, if you ever want to get your picture taken and put on the front page of the London Times, all you have to do is walk down Piccadilly Circus carrying an umbrella. People will think you're crazy, and they'll take your picture and put it in the newspaper. But the day that Ted Owens arrived in England, it rained, it snowed, it sleeted, and it hailed, and there were power blackouts, and the underground was shut down, and within a day or two, the local newspaper ran a story saying the drought is over now. So when Ted Owen got up to speak at the conference, the Parascience Conference at the University of London, with a very distinguished group of people, Ted Owens walked onto the stage, and he was a big man with a beard, a big white beard. He looked like Santa Claus practically. And he carried onto the stage behind him a child's toy wagon, a little red wagon. And it was piled high with papers. And he said, all these papers are documentations of how I am the world's greatest psychic, the UFO prophet, and the PK man, and I am here to save the world. And they started booing him off the stage. People, you know, British people don't take too well to that kind of talk. And, you know, Americans are maybe a little more used to it. But there was Ted Owens, and they actually pulled him off the stage. They made up a story about, somebody else has got, another speaker has just showed up, and you have to... So he was upset, you can imagine. It was very embarrassing to him. But I came up to him and introduced myself in the break, and he was very happy to see me, and, you know, somebody who was being friendly to him. And I had a girlfriend who had given me, when I went on this trip, a little pin to wear. I thought it was a picture of the planet Saturn with rings, and he took a look at it and he said, oh my gosh, you're wearing a pin of the rainbow UFO. He said, that's very special to me. I want that pin. And I thought, if I give him that pin, I'm going to lose my girlfriend. But I did. I gave him the pin to wear. And we became very close friends at that point. In fact, I even went on, stood up and went back into the conference, and I got up on the stage and told people, you know, they should be more respectful of Ted Owens, because what he had done, I had firsthand knowledge about his ending the drought in the San Francisco Bay Area, and they let him come back onto the stage and let him complete his talk. And that was the beginning of a 10-year research project that I engaged him with him.
Wow.
That is something. That's an X-Files in your face right there, buddy.
Yeah, really, really.
Well, it just got weirder and weirder from that point on.
So, what was your conclusion? Do you think it was aliens that was doing it through him? It was a channel for it? Or what did he say about that?
Well, he claimed that he was working with aliens. Yes, he called them space intelligences. And he said that Sometimes they took the appearance of energy beings, and sometimes they took the appearance of large insect-like creatures, giant praying mantises, and they made squeaky noises, so he called them Tweeter and Twitter. And he said they've been watching him ever since he was a child and guiding his life. Because he had had many careers. He had been a jazz drummer, he had been a bullwhip artist in a circus, and he had a knife-throwing act in the circus, and he had been a high-speed typist working for a law firm, and he had been what they called an idea man, working for a railroad at one time. He had been in the Navy. He had worked as an assistant to J.B. Rhine at Duke University in the parapsychology laboratory, and had studied parapsychology. And he said that these space intelligences wanted him to have all these different professions so that his mind would be extremely flexible and that he would have the ability to understand their special ways of communicating telepathically. He claimed that they had been searching for somebody like him for a long time, and that he's the first person they found since Moses who could handle the extreme levels of energy that he was able to work with. And now, do I believe any of that? I don't believe it or disbelieve it. I just don't know. I think I have no good way to evaluate it, because sometimes he would also say, this was his psychokinetic abilities, his own mind over matter. And at other times he'd say, no, I don't do any of this. It's all done by the space intelligences. Some people might say he's not doing it at all. It's simply precognition. He's looking into the future and seeing what's going to happen. So from a philosophical point of view, I think it's useful to keep all possibilities open. It may be that we'll never resolve it.
And you said the energy beings. The first thing I thought of was, of course, with my lightning experiences when you said that with the energy beings. I've never seen any praying mantis people, luckily.
Mm-hmm.
No. Yeah.
Well, maybe energy beings is just fine. And sometimes, I actually went through his training program, and he basically, the way he teaches people how to do this, and he taught many people, he's basically suggesting, well, you're communicating with the deity. You're communicating with God. That's what this is all about, ultimately, whether you call it energy beings or space aliens or space intelligences or nature. So, I get a different story from him every time, depending on his mood. And maybe ultimately it doesn't much matter, because there are probably some deeper philosophical truths, like if you talk to, these days, leading-edge scientists or to quantum physicists or to mystics from all religious traditions around the world, they end up telling you everything is interconnected anyway. We are part and parcel of the whole universe. That's how these things happen, no matter how the manifestations may appear different.
I remember one quote in Roots of Consciousness, and I couldn't find it in the new updated version. I don't know if it's there, but there was something about an astronomer from the oldie goldie days. I don't think it said a name, but he said something about some stars are indeed deities. And I remember that being in the older book, but I'm not sure if it's in the new one. Does that ring a bell at all, some astronomer thing?
Yes, it does ring a bell. Mm-hmm. And offhand, I'm not sure. I'd have to read through my own book to remember who said that, but it does remind me of a statement by someone you probably know quite a bit about, Aleister Crowley.
Yeah, definitely. Every man and woman is a star.
There you go.
Yep.
True. I know I've said this a million times, but my go-to movie on the philosophy of life and death is Ron Howard's Cocoon 1 and 2.
Yeah, that was a classic.
And those are energy-like beings, so that was pretty interesting from old Opie right there, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No doubt about it.
yeah, Ron Howard was quite a visionary.
Definitely. I think he's involved, Ron Howard, doing those Dark Tower Stephen King movies next, I believe. I think he's still on. I know they're doing it. I think he's still involved with that. That should be pretty wild for sure. Mm-hmm. When it comes to Ted Owens, when did the madness start on some level? Was it always there, or did it accelerate? I mean, from going around saying, he's going to down aircraft to garner attention, that's getting pretty crazy.
Now, let me be clear. He never really threatened to down aircraft. It was always an accident. It happened in spite of him. I mean, he seemed to have enormous powers, and he was sometimes careless in the way he used them. So things often happened around him that he didn't intend to happen. But I can explain that in more detail. I mean, he did threaten people. Let me say that. He was sometimes very nasty and could threaten and hurt people. He wanted to teach people lessons. But the downing of aircraft, I don't think he ever did intentionally.
Okay. So what do you think, Wham? I want to make sure to give you some spotlight here.
Well, I'm just listening. I mean, it's been a long time, actually. That I read both these books a long time ago in their original forms, and so I'm trying to think of. I remember. Now there was a relationship between Otto Binder and this guy, right?
Well, you're correct. That's right. Otto Binder, the famous science fiction writer and science writer, and he even wrote cartoons. He I think was instrumental in Supergirl and instrumental in the Shazam comic books.
Right. Yeah. He did a lot of the.
Otto Binder wrote several articles about Ted Owens for Saga magazine. And
exactly. I think that's where I first maybe read about Ted Owens.
Oh, my. Well, and Otto Binder planned to write a whole book about Ted Owens, but then he died.
Yeah. And so you were the person who got to write the book then.
I am the person who had that distinction.
Yes. Okay. So
I have been in touch with, I think his name is Bill Shelley, who has just written a biography of Otto Binder.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I'm actually going to get that because I think Otto Binder's a very interesting guy. He
was just on the show not too long ago. It was great.
Yeah, he because he really connects the paranormal aspect of the paranormal stuff with science fiction and pulp fiction, and it really represents kind of one of the people who overlap, kind of like Ray Palmer, person who kind of overlapped between all of these different communities. And I think as a result of that helped to eventually mainstream some of these ideas. Certainly provided, an avenue for people like Ted Owens to become known to other groups of people, because science fiction posited a long time ago that these kinds of abilities were possible for some people, and certainly had the idea of extraterrestrial contact, in the story. A lot of
That's
times,
right. So. I mean, like Superman.
Yeah, exactly. Or even going back even further than that. I always think of Lovecraft because he was one of the first people to actually just talk about extraterrestrial beings, that were non-human and kind of scary. Maybe. And I always thought that was really interesting about Ted Owens, that the aliens that he experienced were so, non-humanoid in a way.
Yes.
And before that was really known. I mean, now lots of people talk about, reptilians and insectoids. I mean, I wrote my PhD on UFO abduction narratives, so you know, it's not my PhD is not in parapsychology. It's in American critical culture, but you know, popular culture specifically. But so did you actually have the opportunity to observe Ted Owens seemingly doing
for
things?
10 years?
Okay.
Yes. Here's the way he worked. Now, he traveled around the country. He lived on the edge of poverty, to be honest. He got support from a small group of devoted followers. You started to ask me earlier about when did he begin to, you use the phrase, go crazy. And
exactly.
I've known his family. I got to know, I'm still in touch with his children. And his daughter pointed out to me that he was a very good man and a loving father. After he left Duke University and J.B. Rhine, he began to work as a hypnotist and as a healer, and he lived in Texas, and he had a good reputation using hypnosis for healing people. And then the AMA in the state of Texas decided that they didn't like the competition, and they literally shut him down. They put him out of business. Hypnosis, I think, maybe wasn't even recognized at that point by the medical profession as a valid form of therapy. And that's when, according to his daughter, he began to become embittered. And so that may have been part of it. Now, he also told me at one time that the aliens that he works with are using him, the way he described it, it's like the canary in the coal mine. They want to put him on Earth and give him these powers just to see how other people will respond to him. Maybe you could say they were doing a sociology experiment or something.
Wow.
So I have to say, I don't think the human race responded too well, because when I talked to him, he would explain that his greatest desire was that his abilities could be harnessed for the betterment of humanity. He wanted the government to set up a kind of a research center to study these powers, and he would work to help make the weather better and to help the environment and to prevent wars and things like that. But instead, he was met with insults and rude behavior. People were not polite to him in the least. And so, of course, he had a tendency to be something of a braggart. But in any case, people were not nice to him. And then he often felt, well, if they're going to be that way, I guess I better teach them a lesson. And so many negative things did happen because of that.
Yeah, I'm actually looking at something right here because, I wanted to sort of remind myself of him earlier today and to prepare for this. And so I got online and just sort of looked up various people who have had various kinds of experiences with him. And there's an account online by a guy named Wayne Grover, who apparently wrote for the Inquirer at one time.
That's right. Yes.
And they apparently, that relationship got off to a very rocky start, and it really made Owens angry because Grover and the other editor or writer that he was working with that were like maybe going to interview him just were very skeptical of Owens. And
well, Wayne Grover became quite supportive. It was his editor-in-chief.
Yeah, that's what it says eventually.
They made promises to Ted Owens that they broke.
Right. And he actually describes here the process, because he became convinced when he realized over time, because Owens did actually sort of threaten them. And he basically said something about their, what did he say? He said here, he said that he predicted that one of the guy named Horan or whatever his name was, that his life would fall apart, and that there would be like 3 rare June hurricanes or something. But anyway, when it turned out that the string of what he thought were coincidences actually turned out he had about 80% accuracy, he realized that there was something to this guy. And the way he describes it is that this was sort of how it went. He would predict by phone. He would predict by a phone call and then send a written backup, and then he would send news clips of the event that was predicted.
That's exactly what happened. Yes.
And there's a lot of things that he describes actually. It's really interesting. Can you describe, like, just for our readers, like one thing that you actually observed that maybe it was really difficult?
Well,
for you
probably the single most impressive thing was this, Wham. He had, when I went through the files, I discovered that he had a reputation for producing UFO sightings on demand. And I thought that would be interesting. And I asked him, can you produce a UFO sighting for me? And I expected he'd give me a little time. We could set up an experiment. But he said, yes, I'll do it. And here's how it's going to happen. Starting today, for the next 90 days, I am going to create a special psychokinetic field over the city of San Francisco, so that there are going to be 3 UFO sightings over San Francisco within 100 miles of San Francisco in the next 90 days. And they're going to be really good sightings. And so, and he said there will be other things too. There'll be earthquakes, there'll be strange weather, the sorts of power blackouts, things that normally accompany his demonstrations. And then as time went on, he called me up on the phone and he told me, I can feel it coming now. It's going to be a big UFO sighting. This is going to be something you won't believe. He said, this is going to be seen by hundreds of people. He said, it's going to be photographed, and the photograph is going to be published on the front page of one of your local newspapers. And within a couple of days, that is exactly what happened. Not only was it seen by hundreds of people and photographed, it was also videotaped, and the videotape was broadcast on the Channel 9 Evening News in San Francisco. And not only was it seen by hundreds of people, it was seen both from the air and the ground, because what was going on was that at Sonoma State College, 50 miles north of San Francisco, the art department was sponsoring an art exhibit with a very unusual artist named Stephen Pileski, who was an airplane pilot, who flew his airplane right over the college campus with smoke trailing out the back. And he made images in the sky, and that was his artwork. And the UFO appeared right in his airspace, 3,000 feet above the campus. Excuse me. So it was seen from the ground and from the air simultaneously. A picture was published in the front page of the Berkeley Gazette the next day.
Hey, everybody. We got to go on break now, and we can pick up when we come back if we need to. Definitely epic interview here. You definitely got my attention for sure. We're going to go on an 8-minute break. We're listening to United Public Radio, 107.7 FM New Orleans, and we'll be back in about 8 minutes. You're listening to the Church of Mabus Radio Show. Welcome to the Church of Mabus Radio Show. You're listening to United Public Radio, 107.7 FM New Orleans. Yeah, I couldn't believe Bill Paxton died. That kind of got me down there. That was pretty bad. Especially go during surgery. Oh, man. That just totally sucks. But that's what... What was that?
I thought you said the F word. I'm sorry.
No, I didn't. I said that sucks.
I was going to
I've never done that. I've never said that before. So
okay, I see. That's where my brain is going tonight. I'm so tired. So tired.
It's interesting. Well, Bill Paxton was in Terminator, Aliens, Predator, all killed by each creature. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, well,
that's pretty epic right there.
Yeah.
Killed by each creature. but it was a sad loss, especially to go during surgery. That's terrible. Horrific for sure. Alrighty, what was like? Next week's guest, Jose Stevens. First shamanism book I ever came across was Secrets of Shamanism. And then Serge Kahale King's Huna Shamanism book. That was one of my first other books. Of course, Serge has been on before twice. So I'm really looking forward to that. It's good to have a shamanism show. That's what I wanted to, we can get back on with Ted, but one thing that I wanted to ask you about, Jeffrey, I noticed in Thinking Aloud, which I want to see those. I was looking through the catalog at the site, that you interviewed Michael Harner and on shamanism. That was pretty awesome.
Yeah.
What could you tell us about that? Do you recall from Michael Harner?
Well, Michael Harner, and I interviewed a number of people on shamanism. There are two websites, incidentally. There's the original Thinking Aloud website, and then there's the new Thinking Aloud website. They're different. But in any case, Michael Harner is the author of The Way of the Shaman, which is the classic book on shamanism, and he and his wife are still teaching it. They're getting on in years, and they're having health issues. He was going to come to Las Vegas for me to interview him once again, but his health problems kept him from making the trip.
Yeah, his book was Cave and Cosmos. I've read that. It came out a few years ago. His newest. That was great. I really enjoyed that. But shamanism, I've always loved it. Anytime I can get on anyone about that, I go for it. It's just excellent. I love it.
Yeah, I've recently interviewed Nikki Scully, who has written several books on shamanism, and also Stanley Krippner on that topic. So the nice thing about shamanism as it relates to Ted Owens is, well, you might think his abilities are very exotic and he's communicating with alien beings and the first person since Moses, but when I talk to people who study shamanism intensely, they say, yeah, there are lots of shamans who have the kind of abilities that he has demonstrated. It's not so unusual for them. They take, controlling of the weather kind of for granted.
Definitely.
So one thing we haven't talked about specifically is what were some of the, I don't know if you witnessed them or if he explained them to you. I can't remember now exactly, although I think he did talk about this some, if I can recall. But what were some, like when you were talking about his description of the UFO sightings that people were going to see over San Francisco, and how he was going to set up the psychokinetic field to do that? What were the steps that he went through in order to do that?
Okay, yes, that's very interesting because, incidentally, he describes this in some detail in a book he wrote that is still in print called How to Contact the Space People.
Right.
And what he did, according to him, is he would make a PK map. He'd draw pictures symbolic of whatever event he wanted to see happen. And he'd concentrate on that PK map. And he imagined that Tweeter and Twitter, the two space intelligence beings up in their giant UFO, giant invisible UFO hovering over the planet, would sit at a kind of console, and there would be a big video screen of some sort, and they would see on their screen what images he would send to them, and then they, using their extra-dimensional technologies, would make it happen. That's how he perceived it. And so when I say he caused events by accident, including plane crashes and even including the explosion of Mount St. Helens, the volcano in the state of Washington, these events happened because he was playing around with his PK map. For example, when Mount St. Helens went off, he was with his 2 children in a park nearby. He was living in Vancouver, Washington, right at the base of Mount St. Helens at the time. And they were in the park. And he was holding up a PK map right in the direction of Mount St. Helens and teaching his young children how to concentrate on it, when at that moment the volcano exploded.
Wow.
And so he contacted me right away afterwards to say it was an accident. He didn't mean to do it. That's something.
I can remember that. I can remember that explosion really, really well. I know exactly where I was when that happened.
Yeah.
So I didn't know that I was witnessing something that he had accidentally done.
Well, he did a similar thing. There was a time one of his wealthy sponsors paid for him to fly to Egypt and have an experience inside the Great Pyramid in Egypt. And as he was flying back from Egypt, he was up in first class on this airplane, and he was drinking quite a bit. He loved to drink, and he loved to do psychokinesis when he was inebriated. And he had, at that time, Otto Binder had published one of his articles in Saga magazine about Ted Owens, and this article had to do with plane crashes. They were accidental as well, but they were pictures of plane crashes in the article. I'll tell you the whole story quickly. He was invited to visit a radar installation by the Chesapeake Bay. He knew the radar operator, a fellow named Bill Richardson, and Richardson invited him to come in late at night into this radar installation, and Ted Owens said, I can use psychokinesis to make blips appear on your radar. And won't that be interesting? And so he did that, and Richardson wrote up an affidavit saying Ted Owens came in and he said he could make unusual blips appear on the radar screen, and sure enough it happened. Well, and Ted Owens said, oh, and by the way, you probably got to be careful in the next few weeks because I've created a PK field over the Chesapeake Bay, and I hope it doesn't interfere with any aircraft. And in the next 2 weeks, there were like 3 airplanes that crashed into the Chesapeake Bay, including Navy jets. And so Otto Binder wrote all that up with pictures of the Navy jets. And Ted Owens has got this magazine. He's drinking, and he's bragging to the stewardesses up in first class about how he's the PK man who ended up creating this psychokinetic field over Chesapeake Bay, and how unfortunate it was that some jet aircraft didn't heed his warnings to stay away for a few weeks because they crashed. And he's concentrating on these pictures, images of the planes crashing as their aircraft is coming into land at Kennedy Airport in New York, when the aircraft right in front of them, as they're coming in for a landing, is struck by lightning and crashes right into Kennedy Airport. It was the biggest aircraft disaster that had ever occurred at the time. This is back in, I believe, in the early 70s, late 60s. I don't offhand have the exact date right in front of me, but it was a major airplane disaster that occurred. And once again, Ted Owens said, he didn't intend to do it. But he's like a Forrest Gump or something. He always seems to be on the scene when these things happen.
Jeffrey, I was going to tell you, I had forgotten to, because I had never actually read How to Contact Space People. That was not one of his books that I read, but I just looked it up online. And there's actually, I found a site where there's actually an online version of the book. And one of the first things that I saw here is that he Well, he does have stuff in here about how you can do this. So he does have some of his techniques. But he also, there are 2 chapters where he talks about, and Jeffery Pritchett will be interested in this too, he talks about experiences where Bigfoot types of creatures show up.
Indeed, he had many experiences with a wide variety of Bigfoot creatures, poltergeists, strange noises. In fact, you could say his whole life was haunted. He never had any peace. There were always these strange events surrounding him.
And yet he managed to have a family somehow.
Well, yes, he did. He had 2 sons and a daughter, and his widow died only within the last year or so. And but I have to say that I don't think it would be easy to be a child of the PK Man. I know it wasn't. I know that life has been difficult for all of his family members.
One thing I want to say real quick is I have that book, Wham, from New Foster.
Oh, you do?
Yes, I do. I haven't read it, but I have it. I do have it.
Well, it's because I mean, as soon as he mentioned it, I looked it up online to see like where it was, and I realized, oh, there's somebody that's actually put a version of it up online, and it's just book 1. I guess there's like book 1 and book 2 or something, two volumes of it. But he does actually provide some very specific techniques for what he does, and his techniques remind me of someone. I don't know if you're familiar with Michelle. What's her name? Michelle Small Wright. Or maybe it's Michelle Wright Small. I can't remember how that last names go. But she is the founder of an intentional Findhorn-like community. I'm sure you know what Findhorn is. In Virginia, called Perelandra. That's her name for it. And she describes her description of how she has some of these abilities too, although she refers to them differently. And she talks about her techniques of how she gets things to manifest, like physically, in the same way. And her techniques are really similar to his, the way she describes them, like drawing stuff, and creating a field, and she is also in contact with intelligences, but she doesn't refer to them as space intelligences. Although she does say that there are space intelligences, that there are, she refers to them as devas, or that they're earthbound creatures that are part of the physical fabric of the planet, and it's very much like Findhorn, but I was really struck with how similar her processes are to his. There's got to be something to that. Huh?
Do you have a book, Wham?
One of her books?
She has books, so she writes books?
Yeah, she does her books. Probably the beginning book where she describes her process is called Behaving as if the God in all life mattered.
Well, that's a lovely title.
Oh, it's a beautiful title. She's a really, really good writer. I mean, she's an excellent writer. And I don't think a lot of people know about her because she hasn't really interfaced with the paranormal crowd, That's really not, she's been more like with the holistic healing sort of crowd. But what she does would definitely be considered paranormal. And especially if you, if you read her background, read her story. What kind of background does Ted have? I'm sure you found out a little bit about it.
Well, in particular, what do you have in mind?
Well, I mean, did he have a difficult life? Was he raised in a religious framework?
Yeah, I have a chapter in the Roots of Consciousness about that. He was born in Indiana. He did have a difficult upbringing. He seemed to have psychic abilities ever since his early childhood. He was largely raised by his grandmother, Queenie, he called her, who had psychic abilities as well and seemed to encourage him in his own development. And then he enlisted in the Navy. He was in the Navy during the Second World War. He described how he would hypnotize the other sailors on the ship, and he had demonstrated various psychic abilities in the Navy, and then he wrote to J.B. Rhine at Duke University while he was in the Navy to try and talk to him about psychic abilities, and Rhine said, well, when you get out, why don't you come to Duke and work with me? And he did. So that was the famous parapsychology laboratory where the term ESP was invented, and Rhine was famous all over the world for that, and Ted Owens became his assistant and very close to the whole Rhine family back in the 1940s.
Now, that was quite a while ago, wasn't it?
Yeah.
He was born in 1920. I know it probably seems like forever. Well, I mean...
Yes, if he were alive today, he would be 97 years old. But
wow.
He was a heavy drinker, and he died of sclerosis of the liver back in 1987. An interesting thing is when he died, he was living in a farmhouse in upstate New York, and the neighbors reported, and it was in the newspapers at the time, right before his death, that lights appeared in the heavens right above the farmhouse.
Now, do you know where it was in upstate New York?
Well, I think the name of the town was St. Anne.
St. Anne.
Or Anne, New York. It should be in my book, The PK Man, the exact.
Okay. Yeah. See, that's what I mean. I read the book a long time ago.
Yeah.
It's
sitting right next to me on the bookshelf, but since I'm talking to you now, I don't want to reach for it and page through it. Maybe if your viewer, readers, or your listeners are interested, they'll dig it out and find that information. I'm pretty sure it was St. Anne, New York, or maybe just Anne, New York.
Do you remember whether it was A-N-N-E or A-N-N?
No, I don't remember exactly.
Okay.
One thing I was wondering, were there any afterlife type stories after he passed away? Anyone in his family or you have any weird things happen to him after his death?
Well, now you mentioned Wayne Grover, who was the reporter for the National Enquirer. He seemed to feel that he had some kind of context. He was very secretive about it, but he said that Ted Owens made some predictions for him before he died, and those predictions came true, and he seemed to imply that there was some ongoing communication. And I've also been in touch with one of Ted Owens' grandchildren who feels that he has been strongly influenced by Ted. This particular grandchild probably never even knew his grandfather. If anything, they were, maybe when he was an infant he met him, but the families became estranged from each other. But he has felt as an adult, especially after reading my book, that his grandfather has been guiding him in his work.
That's interesting. That wouldn't be surprising, though. Yeah. I mean, even in the area of shamanism, that's very common. He would act as sort of an ancestor.
Yeah. Well, I do think it's very useful to look at these UFO cases, and Ted Owens in particular, in light of all of the shamanistic literature, because it does seem quite consistent that in another culture, Ted Owens might well have been regarded as a shaman and a healer, and might have been considered a very valuable person to his community.
But unfortunately, we don't really recognize that kind of stuff.
Not in our culture, not very much, although things are changing. Every year is a little different, and I hope someday that these people like Ted Owens who will be treated with respect. That's the lesson I learned from working with him, is to always treat everybody with respect, because you never know who you're talking to, what powers they may have. And I think Aleister Crowley once said, you never know whether your next-door neighbor is a demon or not. So it's a good idea to
and he might be referring to himself.
A little courtesy never hurts.
Oh yeah. Well, do you in you working with Ted Owens and maybe even some of the other people that you've worked with, that you've talked to, have you yourself ever felt like you were the author of certain types of experiences yourself?
Well, in my life, I have felt that I've had many experiences that kind of happen mostly spontaneously. Occasionally, I have been the author, like when I went to SRI and did remote viewing. I followed their instructions and did the remote viewing almost perfectly. But I will tell you this, I took Ted Owens' training, and that was in 1986. It happened because he did a demonstration for me that I could no longer ignore. His abilities seemed to be declining, and I was paying less and less attention to him until he called me one night around Christmas, 1985, and he said, Jeffrey, this is the most important phone call you will ever receive. It's up to you now. You've got to call the U.S. government and convince them not to launch that next space shuttle, because if they do, my UFOs are going to blow it right out of the sky. And, well, I did ignore him. What am I to do to get the U.S. government not to launch the Challenger?
Yeah.
But a few weeks later, it did explode, and at that point I thought, maybe I should pay more attention to Ted Owens. So I took his training program and brought him to San Francisco and spent 3 days with him in very intense training. And he asked me when it started, he said, what do you plan to do with this training, with this ability? And I said to him, well, I'm not really interested in making UFOs appear or controlling the weather. What I really want to do, what I want to manifest in my life, is to become an effective communicator between the mainstream public and the world of psychic and esoteric knowledge. That's my goal. And within a few months of completing his training is when I launched the original Thinking Aloud television series back in 1986, and it had a good 15-year run from 1986 to 2002. We were seen on hundreds of television, public TV stations across North America, and now, as I mentioned to you, we're doing it again, the new Thinking Aloud series channel on YouTube. So I'm still kind of manifesting things that I expressed the initial intention to do when I took the Ted Owens training.
So the training you would consider a success then?
I would, because it was above and beyond my wildest dreams that I would ever have a TV show carried all over North America. At the time, I was I was an out-of-work parapsychologist.
Yeah. Well, in the 1980s, when it started, or what was it, late 80s?
1986.
That wasn't the most common kind of show in the world. So, Well,
I actually started doing radio in 1972. I was on Pacifica Radio, public radio in Berkeley, California. That's what gave me the confidence to create an individual interdisciplinary doctoral major in parapsychology at the University of California. And I have to say, to be honest, I was guided. I had dreams that led me to develop a career in the radio and to pursue a degree in parapsychology. And I can say this, if I had one bit of advice to your listening audience, it's that when you resolve to become the best person, to pursue the highest path available to you in your life, the heavens will reach out to help you. You'll find invisible hands that will help you along in your path.
Nice.
Sometimes you have to be willing to really allow yourself to listen to them and follow them without preconceived notions.
Right, and it doesn't mean that everything is going to be easy from then on in.
No.
Far from it.
No.
Far from it, but you will have help. Heaven will reach out to help people who try to become the best that they can.
I agree with that.
One obscure thing I wanted to ask you about that was kind of weird. You and discovering dinosaur tracks in Nevada. What's that? You're like a Tim Burton movie or something going on.
Well, yeah, I moved to Nevada from California 16 years ago, and I love going hiking out here. The wonderful mountains and desert, and within 10 minutes of where I live is a place called the Red Rock National Conservation Area. And I have some hiking buddies. One of them's a former FBI agent, and we were hiking way up into the hills in a very remote spot. And my buddy, who I maybe mentioned is a former FBI agent, saw them, and he said, "These look like dinosaur tracks." Well, to me they didn't. They looked just like strange markings in a rock. But he pursued it. He got geologists to come way out there and look at it, and paleontologists, and it got the Bureau of Land Management confirmed that these are real dinosaur tracks, and the site is now known as the Smith-Nicholson-Mishlove site because the three of us were there when they were discovered, and they were the very first dinosaur tracks found in the state of Nevada.
Nice.
Now there have been several others. Yeah.
What kind of dinosaur was it?
Well, they were about the size of a large dog, and they would look like a velociraptor from the movie
Jurassic Park.
Jurassic Park. They were predators, and that's what it was.
There's a show, I don't know if you've heard of it, that just started on FX. It's called Legion, Legion, and it's by the guy, I think his name's Noah Hawley, or he did the show Fargo, which had Billy Bob Thornton in it as the hitman, devil-like character. But anyway, this new show, Legion, is on FX. It just started. I think it's like on about the 4th episode. It takes place in the X-Men universe, and it's about the world's most powerful super mutant. And it starts off where he's quarantined with this agency, and they're studying him. And then it gets a lot more complex to where he has like multiple personalities, and there's like a devil-like character. But a lot of it, I was thinking some parallels with the Ted Owens and stuff. And the show is like, I mean, it affects you. It's like it feels like it's affecting you on so many levels. It has like multi-dimensional, quanti rims, and just crazy. It gets deep. But one thing I wanted to know. Was there any government interaction with Ted Owens or any trouble on that level ever at all with him? He
tried very hard to interest the U.S. government, and he tried to reach out to the CIA, and he was, I would say, consistently ignored by them. And then he decided he was going to teach them a lesson, and he declared war on the U.S. government, and he said he was going to attack the U.S. government with poltergeists. And sure enough, I get all of these newspaper clippings about poltergeist accidents, strange happenings on naval vessels. And 2 naval vessels even crashed into each other, and he took credit for all of that. But, you know, the U.S. government never paid him any attention whatsoever, to my knowledge.
You know who Ted reminds me of for some reason? It's like he's like the Andy Kaufman of ufology or something. Some a lot weirder, though, if that's possible. But
yeah.
There's definitely some of that conflict. I'm seeing.
Yeah, something along those lines.
Yeah. But has anyone ever tried to movie this at all on any level or anything?
No, and you know, very few people are even aware of Ted Owens in his case. I sort of imagined that this book would make a great movie, and maybe someday it will, but for the most part, when I talk to people about Ted Owens, I get 2 reactions. Half the people don't believe it. They say, this is just too wild, too preposterous. In fact, the very first time I proposed to write the book about Ted Owens and submitted it to a publisher, I got news back. They said, this is not a very good novel. They wouldn't even accept that it was nonfiction. And so I kept the manuscript sitting in my basement for 20 years before I had the nerve to try and publish the book again. But the other half of people will say, this guy is evil. He's doing things that are diabolical. Or I once actually got J. Allen Hynek, the famous UFO researcher, to look at it, and he said, I won't touch that guy with a 10-foot pole because what he does is manifestations of the subconscious mind, and I don't want to have anything to do with that. So, you know, he's either diabolical or he's a total fraud to 98% of the world, and maybe 2% are people like yourselves, and hopefully your listening audience who are able to look at this sort of matter-of-factly and who have a worldview in which this happens to be an example of one of the ways in which the universe works.
Well, one thing I've always said, when I first started doing radio interviews, I was having trouble getting interviews with people. And at first I was doing these little chat room interviews at my website where it was just text and there was no audio. And I finally, like I said, I was having trouble getting people. And I said a prayer. And then one December, I was watching a Christopher Walken movie, and it was one of his newer ones. I don't remember the name of it, but something once again goes, go outside and, you know, look at the sky. And I was like, it's cold. I'm not going out there. But finally, I got up and went out there, and I saw about 3 to 4 fiery red flying objects in the sky, and I called them fireflies. And I screamed like a girl for my brother and nephew because, I mean, it was just so crazy. I wanted them to see it too. They came out and saw it, and we just stood there, and it was almost like whatever we were seeing knew we were seeing it. Because it was like they stopped. It was like they were watching. I don't know what it was still to this day, if it was like a craft or some kind of angel or I don't know what the heck it was. But anyway, shortly after that, I started getting interviews with people who I never thought would give me time of day. Stan Friedman, Lloyd Pye, Nick Pope. I mean, all sorts of people. And it was almost like it was connected, like something helped me. And that's why I think I have these experiences. And it's tied in with the radio show. It's about, you know, raising awareness and consciousness, and there's a tie-in with that, no doubt about it. But it was weird because it seemed like that UFO sighting was, you know, connected to me needing, you know, the prayer to get more, you know, interviews. It was like it was connected. It was. So there's
well, good for you. I'm happy that you're doing this, and I think it's very important to reach out to people because they're not going to hear about this from most mainstream sources. You know, these topics are considered taboo in most colleges, universities, high schools. So if people are going to learn, and I know you're talking from your heart about these experiences, they're mystifying, but to you they're very real and important to share.
Thank you, for sure. one thing I wanted to get in with you a little bit, which I don't know if you want to get into this, was I recall you saying after the election that you had some trouble, not feeling well, and I relate it to that because shortly after the election myself, I got very sick in December with something. I think my brother brought home something crazy from Walmart, but it felt like it was terrible. But I heard that, after the election, a lot of people, got sick or died, and that whole situation seemed different than most other elections. Like, it was just more bizarre. Like, I thought for sure Hillary was going to win. Of course, I was for Bernie, but I ended up voting for her to stop him, and, well, we see where we're at right now. But energetically and what's going on around us right now and all that, I'm just kind of curious to what your perception is on it at some level. I'm kind of like, it's like a Twilight Zone episode. It's like nothing I've ever seen. I'm still I think we all are still processing.
Well, and of course, I'm a political progressive, so after the election, I kept telling myself and telling everybody else, I'm so disheartened. And within a few weeks, my heartbeat had slowed down to 30 beats a minute, and people were saying, you better see the doctor immediately. You're going to die. And I went, and my cardiologist said, well, we got to hook you up to a heart monitor, but you have to wait 3 weeks. And in the interim time, it dawned on me that I was probably hypnotizing myself, giving myself a negative suggestion every time I said I'm so disheartened. And I thought, well, if I can slow my heart down that way, I can make it return to normal. I'll just cancel all the negative programming and reprogram my body. And I did, so that when I finally took the heart monitor test, everything was normal, everything was fine. But for a while, I was so weak that I couldn't climb a flight of stairs. I'd have to stop halfway to catch my breath. And then I posted on Facebook about that, and I got an enormous response from people who talked about, one person said he knew 5 people who were perfectly healthy at the time of the election who had died subsequently. And I think as an example of that, there's Carrie Fisher and her mother, Debbie Reynolds.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that, people have to be very careful of how we talk to ourselves, because the things that we say affect our body. Our body is like a spiritual tissue, and psychosomatic illnesses can easily occur. And if people want to form an effective opposition to the policies of the current administration, if you oppose those policies, it's much better to be in good health than not.
Definitely.
Oh, yeah, I agree with you completely about that, because not just about, what recently has happened, but many, many years ago when I first started working on myself spiritually, which is maybe about 35 or 40 years ago, I was taught really early that the best laboratory to start changing your life is in yourself, and you start with your body. And because I had been raised in a particularly negative way, negative towards the body. And as a result of that, as a child, I was very prone to accidents and illnesses, like rather catastrophic accidents and illnesses that I came to see later on were as a result of me trying to express the contradictions in my life. And I didn't know how to do it because they were contradictions. They were crazy, my own sort of native sense of myself was completely and diametrically opposed in many ways to what I was being taught I should feel and believe. And the only way that I could express that tension was through my body. And I did all kinds of really awful things that have happened to me. I mean, I've almost died like 3 times, stuff like that. And I've learned over time to be very careful about that, because I'm at the point now where, the slightest if I allow myself to get too upset or too obsessed, I will, or too angry. Anger is really a problem. If I find it interesting that Ted got really mad and then things happened, because I can definitely relate to that. I mean, I've been really, really angry and have walked into a building and literally every circuit in it has exploded.
Oh my.
And I did that a couple times, and I realized I need to stop doing this, because that's just, it's expensive and it's stupid, and in the end, eventually I'll explode my circuit if it doesn't work very well. But so for people who are interested in finding their own abilities, to me it's like you start with yourself. You start with your own life. You start with your own body and your own desires and your own, what you have. Because I think a lot of times what people do is they see somebody like Ted, and they either don't believe what's happening with Ted, or they wish that they had Ted's abilities, so they're kind of envious of it in some way. And it's like, don't define yourself by what you may or by what you might not have. Define yourself by who you are and the things that you do have, and then you'll realize what your real abilities are in one way or another. I think we all have probably some psychokinetic abilities on various levels. But he just focused his. And,
he was an extreme example of abilities that are probably widely spread throughout the population.
And he didn't make his life necessarily happier all the time.
Far from it. Probably quite the opposite.
We got about 3 minutes or so. One thing I wanted to say is when it comes to you talking about retooling the body, positive affirmation is definitely a big part of that, isn't it? Just being so...
Absolutely.
I was going to say being so positive. Sick, but that's probably the wrong thing to say. But that's what I've learned. Positive affirmations have helped me a lot. Just reading them from different books. Like I have that creative visualization book by Shaq Gawain and stuff like that. I read that a lot, and it helps. I need to just keep doing it. But that's definitely a huge part of reprogramming is the positivity. Just drowning yourself in it.
Yeah.
Well, and it's like if you don't. If you trash your body, you're basically sort of admitting your powerlessness, and you're just taking it out on your body. Your body can be your best friend about stuff like this, because sometimes I think our bodies are wiser about that kind of thing than we are. When I pay attention to my body, it explains things like, you're tired now, shut up, eat this good food, take a nice bath. That's what my body says. My brain is like, where the hell it is, all over the place. And
we're going to have to close out here very soon. Jeffrey, what's some links? You want to give out some websites? Or your www.newthinkingallowed.com. And it's all one word, New Thinking Allowed, ALLOWED. All right, and you have PK Man and the Roots of Consciousness. Is there anything else, or that's your only 2 books?
I also have another book called Psi Development Systems about training psychic ability.
Okay, I'll have to check that out. I don't have that one. I'll have to check it out for sure. Well, It's been epic. Thank you so much. Very grateful for you coming by. Absolutely loved it. Thanks, man.
My pleasure, and best of luck to both of you.
All
Thank
right.
you, and to you.
Good night to you, everybody there, and y'all take care and keep us in the loop for any future projects. We got your back here for sure. We loved it, man. Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye. Good night.
Bye. Good night.
All right, everybody. You're listening to United Public Radio, 107.7 FM, New Orleans. Coming up next, Supernatural Substation with Jim Mars. Check it out. Good night. Stay out of trouble, because trouble's out there waiting, lurking right around the corner. Venus retrograde, baby. Good night, everybody.
You go on, Ugly.
What was that?
I was just letting you know you were off, that's all.
Okay. Well, I'll catch you later, man. That was Ted Owens. That's some pretty wild stuff.
Yeah, it was a good show. Oh, speaking